thank you all so much for coming to the symposium today and for attending virtually. And we have a wonderful opportunity to ask our speakers additional questions. So happy to take online questions, happy to take audience questions as well. And while you're all thinking of your wonderful panel questions, I'm going to start them off with one that I've prepared already. So over the last 20 years or so, our understanding of plant interactions with each other, with the environment, and other organisms has greatly expanded. Where do you think we are on the discovery curve of understanding these dynamics in extreme environments, and where do you see your specific area of research heading? And you can't take 15 minutes to answer, so it's a quick answer. And now everybody has to answer.
I missed some of the question.
Okay, so I'll repeat the last part. So basically, where do you sort of think we are on the discovery curve of understanding in extreme environments how organisms interact with each other? And where in your specific area of expertise do you see your field going?
I think I have an answer. At least I study mosses, and I think a lot of desert plants are characterized as being like very competitive because limited resources and there's a lot of competition, which is undoubtedly true. We have evidence of that. But at least with mosses, there seems to be at least plausible that there's a lot of facilitation too and cooperation because of the harsh environment. So for example, even with vascular plants, mosses tend to live kind of in their shade, but not too close because then they might get leaf litter. Or in biological soil crusts, there's a successional trajectory. Sorry, I'm going on too long. But anyway, I think that's where I see the future of, like, I don't know if it'll be my work, but desert mosses is looking more into positive interactions with other organisms.
I might follow up on that if I might, especially because I love observing the interactions between mosses and lichens in biological soil crusts, and you can absolutely see like certain lichens nestled in mosses only and not living kind of completely on their own. And in lichenology, I see interactions being studied, especially within individual lichens, and really focus on expanding out our knowledge of that really diverse microbial community and these miniature ecosystems, especially with the rapid advancements in metagenomics and things like long-read sequencing. We finally have the resources to start picking apart what's actually in those systems, and then starting to ask those questions about how they're interacting and what those relationships actually look like.
Looks like Fabian has an answer too. Thank you.
I'm trying to get this to work. Hello. So I'm gonna turn the question a little bit around, and while we, yes, have all these tools, new tools and new drones, and maybe we can think of AI and transcriptomics and genomics, all of this, the one thing that is important to study this environment, any environment, is something that all of you have, and we all have, but we tend to underestimate, which is the expertise of being in the place. So you have an eye for the lichens. If I went out, I would not find that many lichens. You found that moss growing under a rock that if I have turned the rock even to throw it away, I would not have noticed the moss. And these are things, and I cannot fly the drone. So, or pelargonium, I thought it was only one species. They was all the same. So what I'm trying to say is that the expertise is very important, and is something that we forget the human element. And if we don't have the human element that can ask the questions and find the things, we need to keep fostering that and keep supporting that.
Absolutely.
I just want to piggyback. Is this on?
No.
No. Yeah, maybe. I just want to piggyback on that, on the natural history part of species. I have done work on the natural history or morphology. I have done work with genomics, and that's what I'm currently doing. But I tend to always fall back to the morphology, to the physiology, to actually looking at the plant, looking at it in the field, and getting to have a feeling about plants and their community. So I just really love
picking that point that, yes, we have all these new technologies and we need them. This is like great, wonderful things, but just having a scientist, it doesn't even have to be a scientist, but having a person going out in the field and knowing this field and knowing that the changes that they're seeing over time, that is just phenomenal. And we need to continue to fund research that does that goes out into field, finding these rare or not so rare species and tracking this through time, because that's how then I can come in and try to figure out what's happening with climate change, is because we had naturalists and scientists and community members going out and collecting these plants. And now I come in 100 years later and can tell you what's going on.
All right. You know, I'm really interested in cliff environments, and they've just been hard to access before. I think a lot about undersea submersibles, and when they go down into these areas that were unknown, that they start coming up with all kinds of new things and learning about new species. And I think it's kind of like a new era for searching cliff habitats. And there's a lot we can learn. But there's also, you know, plant extinction is happening so fast that we do need to make sure that we get those plants into cultivation or work on them before we lose them. Tanisha had that point in her presentation about just how fast it's happening. So try and learn as much, but also try and save as much.
Excellent, thank you all so much. Any questions from the audience? If not, I of course have more questions. All right. So my next question is, what's the most surprising thing that you've discovered about plants in the extreme circumstances that you work on?
I think one of the most surprising things that I found out about this Fambos communities are all of the strategies that these plants are using, right? And one plant species right next to another plant species. One is saying, I'm gonna hold on to my seeds until a fire comes and then I'm gonna throw my seeds down. Another species is saying, you know what, I'm gonna grow these roots right at the top of the surface. And so whenever we get rain, I'm gonna make sure I grab all of that water and put it into growth and reproductive parts. It's just fascinating how all this wonderful community of plants are doing something just a little bit different from one another.
To me, what was most surprising and also inspiring about research on urban lichens was realizing how quickly so many species came back to New York. And that was really after the implementation of an incredibly effective environmental policy that led to a direct improvement in air quality. And that policy means that the humans are healthier and that the lichens are healthier. And it's awesome to actually get to be the person that sees that response mere decades later.
One thing that I really thought is cool from studying the systems I work in is associated species. You know, I've learned just by looking at photos, drone photos of plants, sort of what the communities look like. And when I start seeing certain plants, then I'm like, oh, this seems like an area where I'll see this other plant. And sure enough, it'll come up. And so just kind of developing an eye and learning how the plants interact with each other and how they're connected, it has been really cool.
So Fabian, I'm wondering if there's any common characteristics. You talked about a lot of different plants in the Tepuis, and I'm wondering, sort of, are there some common morphological characteristics that you see in these plants that have evolved in that very isolated environment?
Well, hello. I mentioned a little bit there in the talk that, I mean, the diversity of families is such, and you have, and I mostly focus on flowering plants, but there are ferns and mosses and lichens and everything. So it is very hard to pinpoint one thing, and there is the variety of environments. It's not only that rocky environment that everybody sees. So there's not the one thing, but if I have to talk about like a syndrome, it would be the tough leaves. They usually cluster towards the tip, usually reddish colors when they're young. not very different actually from the finbows. And in fact, a lot of the families like Eric Casey, and there are no restios there, but there are the sedges that have the occupying the environment. And I think these are all characteristics that you will see anywhere where you have low nutrient, sandy soils, where even if it rains, things wash quickly. I think there's a convergence there.
We have an audience question.
Yeah, so online we have a question. Can you each talk about how you advocate outside of the botanical community for the conservation of the species or habitats that you study?
That is a great question. I would piggyback around to that Fambos Forum. I think that's where I have my most impact. That is a forum where scientists, government and university scientists, community members, landowners, they're all coming to this conference because we all care about the survival of the Fambos biome. And so we spent a weekend together presenting our scientific works, dance parties, eating, going to different field trips, really getting to know each other and build these collaborations. So when we're out there in the field, someone can say, oh, I remember Tanisha said that Pelargonium cyoides is gonna have a hard time here. Let me call her up, or let me read her paper, and let's work together. So I think that's where I make my biggest impact. And then I also share a lot about what I do online on social media as well.
Since she brought up social media, I'm not like an advocate by nature, you know. I prefer not to interact a lot on social media too much, but I do try and share my passion for what I do and the environments I work in with people that I talk to, you know, that personal connection and sharing just how important it is to me, and that seems to help other people realize that it can be important.
Yeah, I second that. I like to I may share this with Jessica and the cryptogam community, but they're small and they're everywhere, mosses and lichens and even liverworts. And just showing that to people, even everyday people that I know, can really, I think, do a lot to advocate for these plants, because you just don't see them. I mean, like you're saying, you just don't see them until you do. And then you start to see them everywhere. So everyday people, and also in teaching, I really enjoy working with students of all ages, and so it's a really fun opportunity to show students early on, earlier the better, mosses, and just get them seeing them, and I think that really does a lot.
So I think in general, one of the problems is that people don't relate to plants the same way they relate to animals, and we have talked about plant blindness and those kind of things, but when you expose people younger, they see it differently, and also not making it completely academic. I just last week I taught a class on one of my kids' high school, but not for his group, and we called it the botany of food, and basically there was a 35-minute lecture and then an hour and a half of chopping everything I found at the supermarket. And you know, when the kids start to realize, oh, tomatoes are fruit, even something as basic as that, tomatoes are fruit, and then I throw them some capers, and there's like, what part of the plant is this? And then figuring out they are eating a bud or something like that. So you have to, if I'm gonna talk only about melastomes or only about tepuis, yeah, you know, I can show them a picture of up and that might interest them, but when they have the hands on and they're chopping, and cannot tell you how many people think that when they learn what an artichoke was, their face of these kids. And you know, you bring a thistle just to compare, and it's fun. So that, going to that basic level, and then, you know, fortunately at the garden, at the New York Botanical Garden, we have the opportunity to have many school groups, and then we have within the garden this program called the Explainers, the Teen Explainers, where middle school and high school students, we train to teach the elementary school, but then training those kids is also part of that. And they don't have to become botanists. In fact, part of me hopes they don't. Not because of competition, but because if they go any day there and there, they become a judge, they become a doctor or a lobbyist, but they know something about plants, I think we're better off.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We need plant advocates everywhere, right? In all places, in all careers. We have a related question from the virtual audience. As experienced botanists, what advice would you give to a group of botany students just starting out?
This is the advice that I give my students now. I help a number of undergraduate students with their research projects, and I tell them to make sure that they take math classes, make sure they take statistics. As a scientist, you are a math major. And then also to keep an open mind. When I was coming up through this journey, I didn't realize how many jobs and how many plants and how many cool places that the plants are. So just making sure you're talking to as many scientists, as many people doing cool jobs, so you can kind of figure out where you want to go, because people are doing, I mean, on this stage are doing amazing work.
Embrace your passion. So don't, if that's what you like, do it. But, and as a scientist, you have to be not only willing, but almost wishing to be wrong. And because when you're wrong, that's when the cool questions come. So they were not looking for a particular plant, and then they found a new euphorbia. And then, you know, maybe, oh, you're not looking for this. Like you went on a BioBlitz for no reason. Well, maybe I find 3 lichens, there's 20. You know, every day that something like that happens, if you accept, if you want to be wrong, you become a better scientist.
Yeah, along similar lines, I would say I always, at least students who are interested in research but don't know what to study, or overly worried about like making a high impact project, embrace the wondering. Just go out there, look around and say, I wonder how that works. I wonder what that's doing. And embrace that, because that leads to the coolest questions. And also you'll enjoy it more because it came from your passions and your wonderings. So.
All right, switching gears, I'm going to have a question for you. The technology you've developed has so many applications in plant conservation. I'm wondering about what are the some of the opportunities that you see for future applications?
Yeah, for lack of a better term, the sky is the limit. I think that we could start looking at canopies, putting in data loggers in locations all around. There's really so many different applications, and I think that interchangeable head really has the power to let anybody, you know, that has a project that they're interested in come up with their own solution for getting that package onto that place. And so, yeah, I'm really excited to just see what comes in the next few years with this.
Awesome, thanks so much. Jessica, I have a question for you too. What can the survival of plants and lichens in the urban heat islands that you've studied them in tell you about their potential to survive in climate change circumstances?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's in some ways like a premonition of what maybe some of the surrounding natural areas might look like in a decade or two if we see these, you know, as that temperature continues to rise. So this is one reason that I'm really excited about how many people are studying urban lichens and how easy how easily accessible they are, because in a way it's like a forewarning system, or a little bit of a peek into the future about which species or groups of species might be able to survive, might be able to kind of withstand the temperatures as they rise.
Awesome, thank you so much. Tanisha, I have a question for you. I really love the connections that you made in your presentation and what you said about the personal water conservation actions of people in Cape Town really being a major factor in avoiding that day zero. I'm wondering if you can speak to some of the synergies that you see between water conservation engagement and plant conservation engagement in South Africa.
Yes, water, as Mama Dundi said in that clip that I showed, she said, water is life. And so in Cape Town, in South Africa, they are really just really knowledgeable about water there, because not only of this Cape Town water crisis, they've had other such crises happened in earlier on, but it wasn't as dire as this Cape Town water crisis. And so they are trying to figure out ways how to take salt out of the ocean water. They're trying to look at technologies like that. So there's a lot of research and a lot of scientists trying to figure out how to get water into South Africa. And along those lines, South Africa does have a big agriculture industry. It has a big wine industry. And so water is really, really important to this region. I also mentioned that it's a World Heritage Site, meaning that so many people from across the world come to this country. And so tourism is really big in this region. And so the water conservation and the plant conservation go hand in hand. And there are scientists and researchers and community members working on this problem because they need this country to survive. They need the Fynbos to survive. They need water to live. And it also is a part of their economy. So it's something that they're actively working on, and they have been for a very long time. They just got hit with some really bad rains for several years. And so they're working on it.
Awesome, thanks so much. And we've got an audience question over here.
Y'all, sorry. Just really inspired by this whole presentation. Thankful for your time today. I know I'm just so happy to learn from you all. And I guess my question, someone asked about community engagement with your work, and then also like plant blindness as a very broad term. I'm a horticulturist with Smithsonian Garden, some of us, and I know I try to have a botanical lens through my horticulture work, but I'm curious, like, where does horticulture overlap with botany from your perspective on the other side, and how do we work at more collaborations in that regard? Like, I'm here for it, and I love that conversation, so I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Oh yes, we need you. We need each other. I worked at Kirschenbosch Botanic Garden for quite a number of years. The most beautiful garden in the world, I'll say it. Still haven't been to Kew yet. But I mainly work not only with the research scientists there, but I work with the horticulturalists there because I was doing some garden experiments, and they are the ones that I feel like they know the plants better because they're working with the plants, they're propagating the plants, they're managing the plants. So I worked a lot with horticulturalists, and I think there should be a lot more overlap with, I guess, botanists, because you're still a botanist. You're still a botanist, but you're doing a specific job, just like I'm a botanist, but I'm doing a different type of job. So we're all in botany, but I think we should definitely be talking across the table to one another more, because in order to conserve these species, we need you. In order for you to know what species to conserve, you need us, so we need each other.
Just to go a little bit farther there is, the horticulturists have an expertise that systematists and taxonomists and even conservation biologists don't have. So we need to lean on that. And but if I had a plea for horticulture is, yes, we want to cultivate things for their aesthetic value, but then there's some things that we can cultivate, we can grow to show the public here, for example, at the Smithsonian, for their wow factor, and then bring them back into science, like make them interested in that. What is the story behind this plant? So think not only in the picture shot that you're gonna get of this beautiful plant, but what is the story? Even if it's a quote unquote ugly plant, it might have such an amazing story that will draw somebody into this world. So that's where we have to have the conversation. And personally, I have it all the time. When I teach, I use the facilities at the New York Botanical Garden all the time. I'm in constant contact with our staff, and they get afraid when I show up with my pruners, but they know that this is for teaching. So then they're okay. But the conversation, we don't have anything in this family, they help us. And this conversation goes back and forth all the time. They can also say, hey, is it possible to get this thing? Because we need them. So the conversation goes on constantly.
And I'm wondering if you have anything to sort of add to that conversation.
I think they both hit it. You know, teamwork. If I bring in plants and we can't grow them in the nursery, then it doesn't work, right? There's this whole conservation life cycle that needs to be completed, and you know, everybody's piece is really important. And yeah, just finding native plants or plants that people can connect with, I think is really cool. You know, in Hawaii, we have resorts and all these places, and people don't even see native plants at all their whole time they're in Hawaii. So trying to get different plants into horticulture, I think, is really powerful.
And then surprise answer from the lichenologist. One thing I do just a little PSA about when I have the opportunity is that sometimes there's a misperception in the gardening community, in the horticulture community, that lichens growing on trees are killing the trees. And that's not the case. And so sometimes there is a correlation between like a dying tree and an increase in the amount of lichens there. And this usually has to do with the fact that often there's increased light availability on that dying plant. And it's not that the lichens themselves are the thing that's directly killing them. And so I just let them live is my plea.
Mosses too.
And mosses too, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we are closing in on the end of our time here. So I have a final question for each of you. So in the spirit of a 30-second elevator pitch, what's the most fascinating aspect of your research, or the thing that you just really want everybody to take away from your presence here today? Fabian, you want to start?
Biodiversity rules. That's it. And we have to treasure biodiversity in every aspect, and we also have to be diverse in the way we study it, from the people that study it, the approaches that we use to study them, and the places that we go to study them. If only the same type of people with the same type of approach study, we're not going to get anywhere. We need diversity of everything, and it is a multi-dimensional diversity sphere.
Yeah, I would say the most fascinating part of my work, and kind of like a elevator pitch, is that yes, climate change is dire, and I get this question all the time: how do you remain hopeful with all those numbers and really sad figures that I share? But I'm hopeful because of the community members that I work with. I'm hopeful because of the conservation managers, the horticulturalists, the scientists that truly, truly care about these places and are working day and night to make sure that these plants and these organisms exist tomorrow and the day after. And so that's my pitch.
The part of my research that I find most fascinating is just being able to work on a really complex symbiosis. And what it's really made me appreciate is the fact that there are actually symbioses everywhere, and that there are really complex interactions everywhere in nature. And the thing that I love about working on lichens is that they're like the package that has it all to me, because they really sit at the fulcrum of the macroscopic and the microscopic world. They host incredibly rich communities in their bodies, and they also respond really directly to the environment and interact with other organisms in myriad ways. And so to me, I think that I'm really excited to be in lichenology right now, because we've made some incredible advancements recently. Many research groups across the planet have, and I think that they're poised to become very accessible as a model system for symbioses more broadly.
I have a few like nerdy things I could share, but since we have so much about conservation here, I'll give an elevator pitch that's why these mosses are so important. They're part of these biological soil crusts that are communities of lichens and filamentous cyanobacteria and other heterotrophic bacteria, and and mosses, and they physically hold the soil together. And in drylands, that's so important because, as we had talked about, nutrients are limited and they literally blow away in deserts without these crusts holding them together. And not only that is it nutrient loss when they blow away, they go up and create dust storms, which put dust into the air, which then humans breathe and causes deaths via car accidents every year. An increase in things like valley fever because of loss of soil crust. And then the dust lands on snowpack in the mountains, causes the snow to evaporate directly, like sublimation. And we've actually seen reduced water availability directly from dust on snow, from loss of biocrust. So like it's so connected. And I think every organism has like a story like that. You just have to, we're all figuring out what it is. But even these little tiny mosses that are in the desert and seem very kind of niche are actually really fundamentally connected to all of us. So that's my pitch.
I'll just say that, you know, the age of exploration is not over. There's still a lot that we can learn, and we may have new tools, but it really comes back to the people that have the passion and the love to do it. So, you know, I'm just hopeful about the future.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here today. Thanks for joining the symposium. I want to thank Smithsonian's Department of Botany and the Museum of Natural History and the wonderful folks at the U.S. Botanic Garden as well in helping to offer this symposium and to coming up with these wonderful topics. I invite you all to submit topic ideas for next year's symposium to us. You can do it through the online portal. You can find myself or Eric or Gary after this presentation to give us your ideas for what sort of topic we should have next year. So thank you all so much, and please join me again in thanking the 5 wonderful speakers that we had today.